show, which is mainly focused on looking at how to improve outcomes for students in lots of different ways. That's the main focus for today.
Live from Liverpool, this is the Twilight Show with Scott Hughesley on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Well, afternoon, everyone. Hope you've had a fantastic day. I don't know about you, but I'm ready for a little bit of a sunlight chill out beats. Got to say, it's been really nice getting the end of tags. Sick and tired of marking. Finally, we are the exams in March. Faith has been put, and I'm ready and well. Please, let's not pack a load into my game now. What the chances are? Hey ho, let's keep positive vibes going. Right, guys. So today we're going to focus on improving outcomes for students. And I'm looking at this from a different range of perspectives, mainly from my own experience. So obviously primary teachers and secondary teachers will have a range of different experience when it comes to improving outcomes for students. But today I just want to share some of the ideas I have and some of the experience I've had around improving outcomes. I've mentioned before that in terms of the outcomes for my subject, they are nationally high performing, have been for a number of years. So performing in the top 3% or 1% nationally for a number of years now in terms of the subject. So that's where I'm coming out from in terms of experience. And I just wanted to sort of share some of the ideas and bits and pieces along the way that we want to think about in terms of, or I've thought about, should I say, in terms of achieving those outcomes for students. So first of all, the curriculum side of things is massively important. And I know this idea of a change in terms of curriculum has been something that's been on everyone's mind and has been pushed in plenty of schools, looking at this idea of knowledge-based curriculum. A lot of the contexters and really focusing on the sequencing and building of knowledge and building of skills. It's been a really big push. And I think for me, a lot of the time when I visit departments and I go and meet with the leads, look at how results can be improved, sometimes staff haven't either been given the time they need to actually implement some of these ideas, or sometimes it's that point where there's not many members of staff in the department and they're trying to sequence put that knowledge base into Key Stage 4 or Key Stage 5 first, or even lower down in school when I've visited primary schools to look at the national curriculum coverage. And that sequencing does take time to build in. It has quite a big impact. So for me, first and foremost, it's about understanding the curriculum and the sequencing of that curriculum as a way of improving outcomes for students. So we need to make sure that your curriculum, whether you are a department lead or whether you are any member of teaching staff, to really focus on, is our curriculum fit for purpose? Sorry, Mal, I was just reading your comment there. Sorry, it was a bit late on that one. And in terms of fit for purpose, we mean, is the knowledge being covered? Why are we covering that knowledge? What skills are we building along the way? What knowledge and understanding are we building along the way? And is it sequenced correctly to build that knowledge and skills over time? And for me, I've visited a number of departments where it seems to be really still quite topical And members of staff will talk about how the knowledge is built within that topic and talk about how the skills are inbuilt within that topic as well. But the long term, they're looking at the curriculum from where it starts to where it finishes at the other end, is something for me that I've massively focused on. And I think it's had a big impact on outcomes. For geography, for example, most subjects used to start in the past, or most curriculum areas used to start in the past, focusing specifically on skills. And there always used to be a half term where people were looking at grid references and measuring distance, etc. And those skills weren't actually built into the curriculum over time. And I still come across a couple of different departments that I've visited where those skills aren't actually built in, that there's taught standalone and then built in later on. And same with the knowledge. The knowledge seems to be focus on one topic and then move on to another topic. And for me, for example, my year 7 curriculum starts looking at ecosystems to begin with, and we start developing knowledge of wider ecosystems, and developing that over time. So understanding the soil cycle, understanding human environments within that, understanding the physical processes, animal adaptations, etc. But there's a big focus looking at development, particularly looking at building of urban areas. So we naturally move from looking at ecosystems to begin with, and then move into a more focus, or a greater focus, should I say, on looking at the urban environments and how urban environments then grow from natural areas. And we massively focus on, as cities grow, there's a movement in terms of development and areas becoming richer, linking back to look at the damage that creates on the ecosystems. And then we then move in to start looking at developments, but specifically in Africa. And that development side, that money and economic side, then feeds into the Africa and development topic at the end, then builds that into a wider context. And that then continues all the way through our curriculum. And we don't only just build in that skills knowledge, understanding, but we also really build in that, are we building on that prior knowledge? And for anyone who wants to really focus on stronger outcomes for students, I'd really say go back and look at your curriculum. Is it fit for purpose? Can it be sequenced in a better way that supports that knowledge to be built over time? And with outcomes, it's usually the small tweaks that make the most difference. And Kate Jones just said as well that obviously the skills unit changes to its built in as a head of department. It's really important, it's really impactful in terms of students linking that skills to their knowledge and then developing that for the exam skills later on. I also try and build in what's called an aligned autonomy. Yes, as a department leader, I try to be quite rigid in terms of this is what we need to cover. But I'm also aware that my staff have different strengths within the department. Some may be stronger human geographers, some may be stronger physical geographers. So, for example, when we're studying natural hazards for a half term, the members of staff can actually study whichever natural hazard they want. There's a range of different natural hazards within there, and the member of staff can choose the one they enjoy the most. All the skills and the sequencing of the learning is exactly the same for each natural hazards topic, but it allows that member of staff to play to their strengths, which has a greater impact on student outcomes. So that'd be the first thing I'd say. Looking at, I could spend hours and hours talking about curriculum, but I think that's very important to make sure your curriculum is first and foremost in place in a way that builds over time. And it's one of those things that when you see it working, you realise how a properly sequenced curriculum actually has an impact. So it can have quite a big impact over time. The next thing I'd say in terms of improving outcomes for students is really looking at upskilling yourself. If you're a department lead, I would also say upskilling your department, but start by focusing on doing a skills audit. You as a teacher, or your teachers within your department, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, or should we say areas of development, and really focus down and say, what CPD needs have we got? To be a high performer department, we need to really support each other in this way. And I think as a head of department moving into a school, you tend to think, well, this person's a geographer, this person's a historian, they know their stuff. And a lot of the time, that is the case. They know the knowledge, but will teach slightly differently, and depending on your focus, that can have an impact on your outcomes, because may think a member of staff may be teaching exactly the same structure that you are, but actually they're teaching their own way. That has an impact on students' outcomes because it's not consistent across the board. And you see this an awful lot where students will move from year 9 into year 10, get a different teacher, and then move from year 10 into year 11, have a different teacher. It massively prohibits the progress that students are making because they're used to that member of staff, they're used to the way they are teaching. And as much as we would love to have sometimes teach all of Key Stage 4, because you know how to get the progress and move those members of staff forward, it's very important as a department you work together and say, this is how we need to teach structure, this is how we really need to teach the skills. So that way, no matter which member of staff in the department, the students are going to be making that progress over time. So it's really quite important to then provide that training, lots of one-to-one conversations, lots of popping in and out of lessons. I am a massive believer in going to different people's lessons all the time. I'm not a fan at all of lesson observations. I don't believe in lesson observations. I'll go and sit in members of staff's classroom and mark, for example, while they're teaching. They'll come and sit in my classroom and mark while they're teaching. If I was performing a lesson observation per se, I very much focus on looking at it from the student's perspective. So I'll very much like visible learn. I'll take students out of the classroom, ask them what they're learning. How do they know that they're learning that? Is this typical of a normal lesson? And really looking at that sort of impact. There's very little time within a lesson that I'll spend actually sat in a lesson just sitting and watching a traditional way. So Kate Jones just said, lesson observations, lots of issues with them. I spoke to Kate, they told them to stop grading lesson observations. I would completely agree, Kate. I think for me, the two areas that I focus on, I know you're a big fan of John Hattie as well, but visible learning principles to really understand how students are learning and the impact they are making over time. But also with my Nasenko qualification, love Hattie, everyone loves Hattie. With my Nasenko qualification, one of the areas you look at there is lesson studies, and using lesson studies as a way of improving impact. It's a really collaborative way of moving forwards. You'll have a number of specialists in a classroom. They're not actually watching the teacher, they're understanding how that lesson's being delivered in a way to really support those students and constantly have that feedback to keep improving over time. And if you build that into your department, it has a massive positive impact over time as well, a real support, and you can know who to go if you're struggling with a particular area, who to go to and to speak to, because even as subject leads, we're not experts at everything, and some classroom teachers or the Senko in the school or some of the TAs have some of the best ideas to support those students, and it's a really useful way to tap into those and really support the students in the best way possible. Next area then I wanted to have a quick chin wag about is understanding your spec. And I spoke about this an awful lot in last week's show, but you are delivering specification to your students. And by delivering the specification, you're not just delivering the knowledge that they need to know for the exams, but you really need to know inside out, how is that being assessed? What are your assessment objectives? And really drill down to how are those marks awarded? Now, a lot of the time, there's a number of ways that you can structure an answer that allows students to get to the top marks. For example, in geography, it'd be level 3 responses. And what you need to do is sit down with your department and really understand that structure. What structure works best for our kids? What structure do we feel comfortable with? And then as a department, agree on the structure you are going to follow, for example, for a level 3 response or for a level 2 response, and make lots of modeling to support that, but really build that into the lessons. You will find that no matter what department you are visiting, for example, a history teacher can go into lots of different history departments in other schools, or a geography teacher can go into lots of different geography, or same with English. You can pop into any English lesson, any school around the world, and students will be getting taught the same content. The information they are being delivered is generally very, very similar. There's very little difference between that. In terms of the schools that make the strongest outcomes or the strongest progress, should I say, for those students, it's the schools that really drill down and say, how are we putting this information together? And that's something that, in terms of student outcomes, I would say has the greatest impact on students' progress, really look at how do we allocate those marks, and then tell the students about it. Don't just keep that information to yourself. Really upskill your students as well. And your students should really be able, once again, linking back to Hattie, this idea of self-regulation. They should know the success criteria of how to get to those marks. If students know how to do that, they can then make the greatest progress. They can self-regulate, they can check, rather than relying on the teacher all the time. That allows them to self-regulate their information and keep making those improvements. If anyone's not read it, I'd massively have a read around John Hattie, particularly looking at self-regulation techniques, and really try and build that into your lessons at all stages. Most of us recognise it in things like success criteria, but they are really impactful when it comes to improving outcomes for students. So in terms of that self-regulation and moving students forward, I'd say the biggest thing that I try to do is train students as the examiners. The students should know where the marks are allocated, why they're being allocated in that way. If the students understand where the marks are being allocated, they can access them better. Okay, and that obviously has a big impact on student outcomes. And we do that in a number of ways. So student reading out answers and having whole class feedback. We can have built-in success criteria into your lessons. There's a number of different ways that we can do this, but it's very, very important in terms of improvement outcomes. The students know exactly what they need to do to get those marks. I, as a complete adult, or I try to be anyway, if I ever go to a CPD meeting, or if I ever get pulled into any sort of meeting and something's going on and we get given a task, I'll be one of the first people to be sitting there looking around saying what's going on. I've listened to the instructions and I am worse than the students when this happens. The second the task starts, I have not got a clue what is happening, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on around me from someone that looks slightly less bewildered. And I think if we still struggle with that as adults, then surely that support should really be there for our students. There's nothing better than having that support or model examples available when you're an adult. You know exactly what you're doing. For example, if you were doing your middle leaders, or you were doing your head teacher MPQSL, for example, the first thing people are looking for are examples. What do I need to do to get those marks? How do I need to put this together? If we're thinking that as adults, then for children, it's something that really needs to be looked at and supported along the way, because students will sit and nod and smile, but not be completely sure what is going on, and that will lose learning time. Exactly the same for me. If I go to a meeting, I'm not entirely sure what's going on, I ask to do something, I tend to just nod along and stare at someone else's paper, and not entirely sure what's going on. I get the general gist, but I don't get the deeper understanding, and we need to make sure that we're putting that in place for our students as well. So we're going to have a go, right? Let's see how we get on, of doing our latest advert. So fingers crossed, no tech issues here. Let's see how we get on.
Introducing Amanda Davey. Amanda is one of the first specialist teacher assessors for dyscalculia in the UK and offers dyscalculia tutoring and bespoke training for schools. With 26 years of teaching and tutoring experience in the UK, Amanda offers specialist online tuition focused on building confidence and developing skills. Amanda also offers online and face-to-face training on dyscalculia for educators, informing practitioners as to how to identify children that may have dyscalculia and how to support them in class. Find out more about Amanda and what she can offer you at www.amanda-davey-dyscalculia.co.uk. Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. At Creative Resources, we've been rethinking what a classroom can be. We've created a huge range of more than 2,500 original and exciting resources that span across more than 15 different subject areas. Whether you're looking for primary or secondary level resources, careers options, PSHE, arts, or humanities, Creative Resources have the resources for you. We offer full curriculum packages and unique, challenging escape rooms themed on topics such as Shakespeare, Tudors, and fractions. We have quizzes, task cards, Tarsier puzzles, and lots more. Better still, more than 100 resources can be accessed for free. Just visit our website www.cre8tiveresources.com. You can get 10% off any order you make on our website by using discount code TT Radio. Creative resources made for teachers by teachers.
Well, that went almost without a hitch. I'm rather proud of myself. The tech is going quite well this week. Let's see how we get on. I've probably just jinxed myself, but let's keep going. So far we've spoken about, in terms of improving outcomes for students, really understanding your curriculum, making sure it's sequenced, making sure those skills are built in and they keep being revisited throughout your curriculum. Okay, keep building on that prior information and linking back. And there's lots of information on this around retrieval practice and lots of other ideas. But really trying to build that knowledge and skills over time. Really understanding your spec and how the marks are allocated, and then really upskilling both your staff and your students to understand how those marks are allocated in a way that's kind of the greatest impact for those academically. Now, next thing I want to speak about is this homeschool student partnership. In a nutshell, essentially, relationships. Building these relationships with your students, building these relationships with parents and guardians at home, but also building it with your wider colleagues in school to best support your students' outcomes. And this has a massive, massive impact, particularly if you are new to a school or you've recently moved to a school or you've just taken over a department. What you want to do is you want to give yourself a bit of might within the school, a bit of gusto behind you in terms of support. And what tends to happen is if a new member of staff starts the school, there tends to be a bit of time to establish yourself, which once again tends to be a little bit of wasted learning. That the focus there is on around students getting to know the member of staff getting to know the students, to understand how the policies and processes work in school, etc. In the meanwhile, your students are actually losing some progress over time. They may be getting knowledge, but that progress isn't as rapid as it could be. And one of the best ways to actually turn this around quickly, if you've just taken on a department or if you've just started a school, is to really get yourself into that community and really understand that school, understand the relationships, and build those relationships quickly that are going to support you to move forward. When we talk about relationships, though, it's very much needs to be focused on the academic side. So yes, you can maybe have a little bit of a laugh and a joke with students outside the classroom if you get involved with a football club, for example, or if you get involved with a basketball club outside school. You can build those relationships there, but they're not specifically academic. I'm talking about students has done this in class, done a strong piece of work, straight away you're ringing home, you're sharing that with the parents. I always think as well, when you're talking about rewards and you're ringing home, you're sharing positive information or you're sharing it with other departments, walk past and tell that student what they have done well academically. So you've done an amazing 6 out of 6 response. That level 2 was really, really good and really, really detailed. And try and use that language of learning that you're trying to build with students with their self-regulation into those general conversations. If you're talking to parents and talking about how well that student has done, always then talk about the next steps, the same way you would do if you were giving feedback, for example, if you're marking, giving student feedback. So he's done really, really well. He's done a level 2 response. 2 of his points are really well made. He's explained 2 of his points really, really well. Just for next time, I'd want to see that focus on the last point and really try and aim both the students and the parents at this step by step moving forward, particularly in areas of disadvantaged background. That praise, but also those next steps are so important into getting the buy-in from both the parents and from the students. And I'm a big believer in heaping praise on students. I know people say that we shouldn't heap too much praise on students some of the time, but actually for me, I think working in disadvantaged backgrounds, pretty much every school I've worked in, it has the greatest impact. You are praising the child, you're saying they're doing really well, and this is what we want to do as next steps. I want them to do even better. And build yourself as part of the family, essentially. Make that contact and support that student to be doing well academically, not just saying, oh, he's done really well, he's sat there and he's not messed around all lesson. Really focus on the academic sides and how we can keep pushing that forward. That really does support progress of students over time. And it builds on part of what I like to call my battle plan. And when it comes to battle plan, I tend to go to war, should I say, on outcomes. My focus is that students may like me, they may enjoy my lessons. The thing they're going to really have an impact on their future lives is those students getting those outcomes. I'm not there to be their friend. That doesn't mean I'm not friendly to students. I'm very positive with students. We have a really good relationship. But first and foremost, I am there to get them a grade 9. Whether that student is targeted a grade 2 or whether that student's targeted grade 5, straight away I'm saying this student, top grade you can get is a grade 9, and we're all going to get there, and really setting those high expectations to push those students forward. And following that battle plan, or by battle plan, I mean you've planned all your lessons in a really strong way to support that structure and that building of knowledge and structure over time. You've got a really strong curriculum in place. Your homeworks are supporting students, retrieval practice. Online, there's all the information they need as well. So you may make you may refer students to things like Seneca, or you make your own revision videos, which I do for my students, where you can keep going back and keep developing that knowledge and understanding with lots of model answers built in. Just a point on that, it is very time consuming. So I'd say don't be expecting to pull that out within a couple of days. It does take time, but what you're looking for is getting something really impactful in place for those students. And then really focus in. Where are my students currently? What are their weaknesses? You can do this by doing assessments and doing QLAs and looking at the area. Generally, you can get it from students doing whole class feedback. I tend to count out the marks as students are feeding back in the lesson, but really focusing on, you're missing the mark there. How do you need to get that next mark? And you need to be almost relentless with that. Keep going back to top marks, top marks. How are we going to get top marks? Is that level 1? Is it level 2? Is it level 3? Any students that have fallen behind, put in place a really robust and timely intervention process in place. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are doing lots of intervention with students outside school and giving lots of your own time. I tend to have what's called an explain pack, or a describe pack, or an evaluate pack. If I know that students are particularly struggling with explaining, there's a particular intervention pack that students will be able to take home and keep working on that particular skill. So it actually takes the onus away from me, because I've produced that pack ahead of time, which then the students then focus on that particular area. And then keep going. Is a student falling behind? Is a student falling behind? Let's push them. Let's keep them going. You've got to be, in terms of really strong outcomes, you've got to be very, very, very focused on students can't fall behind, or they've done not great on this exam. Let's just see how they do on the next one, next half term. No student can afford to spend a half term where you thought they're not where they need to be. Let's see how they get later on. You need to be very relentless with this. It's the only way you're going to secure those really, really strong outcomes for your students. Putting that intention, and in the long run, it actually does save time. We've all been, or we will have all been, in that position where you've moved into a school and you've taken over year 11s that are well behind where they need to be. And we've had that big push of running around and lots of intervention support, and lots of classes after school, and lots of phone calls of parents. And you go through that whole process and you are completely knackered by the end of it. You're tired, the student's tired, they're not able to focus anymore. It is a completely unsustainable model. If you're not putting in that intervention and support lower down at school at a lower level, then you're going to keep getting to the situation where you're having that big push in year 11, and you're just then playing catch up rather than pushing students to make that greater levels of progress. So I'd really say, look at your year 7s, look at your year 8s, what things we put in place to support there to make sure we're not falling behind. Don't just think we're going to wait for students to do their options and then I'm going to step in, or we'll wait for year 11 and then we'll see what's going to happen. It needs to be very, very focused on making sure that students are not falling behind, that they've got those skills and the support is there and provided you are not able to support every student within the school, but go ahead of time, be proactive with it, put some support in place in terms of booklets or work booklets or model answers, things that are really going to support those students without the need for you to be there in person. So I'd say that is massively important in terms of supporting stronger outcomes for students. With that, though, it sounds like it's going to have a massive impact on your workload. Okay. And what I'd say is being proactive with this has the greatest impact because in the long run, it makes it much more sustainable. But we also need to focus on what is your workload? Your workload should be focused around getting students to the greatest outcomes. And this is where what I like to call it the power of no comes in. It doesn't mean that you're going to focus on lots of extra intervention, lots of other different ideas on top of what you already do and what you're expected to be doing. There's only so many hours in the day, and there's only so much you can be expected to do. And one of the things I try to do massively as a department lead is really strip away anything that is superfluous towards the department, anything that we do not need, doesn't have a direct impact on student outcomes. I tend to be like, no, I'm not doing that. We're not doing that. SLT tend to come along and they'll say, I want you to do this, this, and this. And to support my department, I tend to go, why? Why do I need to do that? What impact's that going to have on the students? And I will question managing upwards, as I believe it's called, to try and make sure that we're getting as little excess workload put on the department as possible so we can really focus our time effectively on supporting those students. And this can be something that's quite hard to do. I know, particularly if you are starting a new school or you've just taken over as head of department, we get lots of ideas around all these great, big, bright ideas of all these different things we're going to do in the community, and these lots of ideas and lots of these extracurricular ideas around. We tend to agree to lots of these things in interview. I remember almost every interview I've ever been to, there's always a question about Duke of Edinburgh. Were you willing to run Duke of Edinburgh? You think, yeah, at the time, and the second you are teaching within the school, the amount of time you would have to do that is massively reduced. And things like even preparing for my new school, like the head teacher spoken about, there's a massive field next to the school, and if you wanted to make that into your own woods for the students to use, and if you wanted to really focus on developing like a school farm, for example. And there's me getting way too overexcited as a 32-year-old man about having chickens and sheep and things in school and developing those learning ideas, which I would absolutely love to do. But I need to rein myself in and say, what I need to focus on is the results. First and foremost, that's what you are there to do. So try and make sure you're not being distracted by all these extra jobs and extra ideas, and really focus on outcomes, outcomes, outcomes. And that has, strange enough, the greatest impact on outcomes over time. So after the news, we're going to have a quick chat about different ways that we can start to support these outcomes, looking particularly at modelling and really supporting our lower ability pupils and our SEND students. I think I might have mentioned this a couple of times before, but I'm a qualified SENCO, and with my new role, I'm looking specifically to support students with SEND within a whole school context. I want to talk a little bit about how I found that having the greatest impact for outcomes as a department leader.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Megan Goods.
This is your latest Teachers Talk Radio News. The latest modelled data from the Office for National Statistics has led to calls from school leaders to prioritise vaccinations for anyone over the age of 12. The data highlighted that students in years 7 to 11 in secondary schools had the highest infection rate of any age group, with one case in every 210 on the 2nd of June. At the start of May, the same age group rate was over 4 times lower. One professor of infectious diseases at the University of Edinburgh, Mark Woolhouse, doesn't think the increased infection rate is a cause for concern just yet, saying, "If the Delta variant is much more transmissible in children, it might raise the R number in schools above 1, and then you would consistently start to see larger outbreaks more frequently in schools. So far, I don't think the PHE data are convincing on that. Yes, there are outbreaks in schools, but it's a tiny fraction of them. The Children's Commissioner has said that the ease of access for children to online pornography is a key factor in the normalising of sexual harassment in schools. Dame Rachel de Souza stated, "One area I'm clear on is that online hardcore pornography warps boys' expectations of normal relationships and normalises behaviours that girls are then expected to accept, and it's just too easy for children to access." She has called for internet companies to introduce more restrictions on what children can access online, and also plans to work with tech companies, law enforcement, children's charities, and schools on how to make children safer online. The Duchess of Cambridge and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden met for the first time last week as they visited Connor Downs Academy in Cornwall. They have since written a joint article stating the importance of early education for children. The letter, published by CNN, said, "If we care about how children perform at school, how they succeed in their careers when they are older, and about their lifelong mental and physical health, then we have to care about how we are nurturing their brains, their experiences and relationships in the early years before school." That was your latest Teachers Talk Radio News.
Welcome back. So we're just going to have a quick recap to begin with of what we've covered so far. So far we've spoken about in terms of improving student outcomes, really focusing on that curriculum and really making sure that it's sequenced in a way that really supports the development of knowledge and skills over time. So really drilling down, builds on the skills, knowledge and understanding of your staff, and really try and build that skills or that upskilling within your department and with yourself as well. If you know there's a particular area that you are not as strong as, really try and focus on developing your own skills in that area as well to best support your students. Real focus on understanding the specification and how marks are allocated to really support your students once again in how to access those higher marks. That really helps particularly with lower ability students and SEND students as well, which we'll come back to in a second. We'll come back to a later part of the show to really support those outcomes for students that struggle in terms of getting to the higher marks or in terms of attainment of grades later on. Really setting aside that battle plan. So have a look at your students, have a real focus on setting that battle plan in place to really best support those students. Looking at where their targets are, what are our next steps, and make sure you're sharing those on a really regular basis, both with the students and with the parents and guardians at home, to keep informing next steps and keep pushing for excellence within the department. I'd also say as well that really focusing on looking at the staff's workload, looking at your workload. Are you focusing your time and energy in the right areas that are having the greatest impact on outcomes? If you're not, let's try and pull some of those superfluous jobs backwards to really try and support students to move forward. So next thing I'm going to speak about then is really supporting our low ability students and our SEND students in terms of making progress. It's a term that tends to be coined that I'm not hugely wild about, but this idea of the LAP students and SEND students give you your greatest bang for your buck when it comes to progress. These are the students that are coming in on the lowest levels of progress a lot of the time. Not all students with SEND obviously do perform less well on exams, but in general, students with SEND and our lower ability students are generally the students that can underperform. But they're also the students that have the greatest impact on your progress. So, for example, if a HAP student is, or high ability student is targeted a grade 8 and they get a grade 8, that's fantastic. but the progress those students are making remains really quite low. Same as if they're targeted a grade 8 and they then get a grade 9, also fantastic, but they're only making one extra level of progress. Whereas a student who's come in on quite a low level that may only be targeted a 4 or a 5, if that student then gets a 7 or 8 or a 9, the progress figures will really improve within your department. And myself as a leader, or as generally as a teacher, actually, I tend to teach really quite well to the high end. I'm quite naturally really good with the high end in terms of securing the attainment grades, in terms of getting 7, 8s, and 9s. Whereas previously, the students at the bottom end, in terms of the ability scale, were performing well, but nowhere near as well as those students who are on higher ability. And for me, in terms of the greatest impact on outcomes, this has been had through actually supporting those students who are low ability pupils or those with SEND to really make the greatest progress possible. So I've one, or say, first of all, one way of doing that is building in modelling to every lesson, really showing students this is exactly how you get to the higher grades, and building that scaffolding into your lessons to support students to move strongly forward. And like I said, modelling is a really strong way of doing this to support those students moving forward. Particularly those students with language acquisition, or those students who are low ability students that struggle with accessing exam content, not because they don't understand the knowledge, but more through the fact that they find it difficult to understand the language being used in the sources or the questions being asked. And for myself, as my project for Minor Senko, one of the things I focused on was trying to support these students in the best ways possible. And we focused on like a hybrid version of using Makaton within the classroom to really develop students' knowledge of keywords. We spent a really big chunk of money developing a specific subject-specific area within the library to really support students moving forward. And that language acquisition has been really invaluable in allowing our low ability students and our SEND students to be able to access the curriculum. So modelling and really focusing on language acquisition, really focusing on the language for learning being used in the subject, has a massive impact on students being able to access that information, but also being able to move forward then with their grades. You'll find that the progress these students make, once they are supported, is much, much greater than high ability students, and has a much greater impact on your outcomes as a department or as a subject teacher. With that as well, I would also say that focusing on your LAP students and your SEND students is a great way for improving your overall outcomes as a department leader or as a classroom teacher. But I would also say that one of the main areas that you really need to focus on is this idea of apathy within the subject. We all know those students that will come in, they'll sit down, they'll do as they're told, they'll write the title, they'll write the date, they'll do the work. They're not really causing any issues behaviourally in lesson at all. But they're sort of just whiling away the time during the lesson. There's a very apathetic approach to learn. I've come in, I've wrote what you've asked me to do, and I'm moving on. And particularly when you've got other issues in the classroom, you may have behaviour issues that are coming up. A lot of the time we tend to ignore those students. We think they're not causing us any trouble. We need to focus on the students whose behaviour isn't good enough within the lesson, and really focus on that. We don't want to be challenging extra students in the lesson and making work for ourselves. And you will often find that those students are the ones that have the greatest negative impact on your progress measures. Massive negative impact, because a lot of those students will perform generally around like a grade 4 or a 5, but most of the time they are targeted at a 6 or a 7 or even more. And these students, those coasters in the middle, is something that should not be forgotten at all when it comes to securing really strong progress within your subject. You really need to focus on those students, not just your laps, not just your SEM, but really focus on supporting those students to be the best they can be. And that is quite a difficult conversation to have, particularly if you're trying to work on that home school partnership. If you're ringing home to say your child is not doing as well as what they should be. And for a parent to hear that, you're thinking, well, it's either behaviour or they're not trying in lesson. So you would ask, well, are they misbehaving? Are they not doing what they need to be doing within lesson? Oh, no, they're fine. They sit there and they listen. Or do they answer questions? Yeah, I ask them questions, they answer questions. Okay, so what's the problem then? Are they not doing the work? Yeah, they've done the work. And generally, these are the students as well that have the nicest books. They're really nice handwriting. Everything's nice and well presented, but there's just nothing really there of depth. And then having this conversation with a parent where you're saying, well, actually, they behave themselves really well in lesson and they do all the work, they're doing what I'm asking them, but they're just not pushing themselves. As a parent, that's quite a difficult conversation to be having, because it's not like your child's being naughty or misbehaving. It's not like they're not really focusing in lesson or doing everything the teachers ask. So as a parent, what do you say to that child? What are you, as a teacher, ringing that parent to ask them to do? It's quite a difficult thing to put into words. So when we're doing that, this is really, really important that we link back to what we said before, that we really focus on the academic. So I'm just ringing home because your son's got a grade 5 and he's done this, this, and this well. I completely believe that he should be getting a grade 9. And I'm putting all these extra support in place in terms of support, and that the areas that he needs to focus on are this, this, and this, like developing his answers and putting more detailed points, using case studies to support his answers. What I'll do is I'll send you a letter home with all this information and to be able to support him. I'll also send you an intervention pack. That way, you're not framing it in a way of the child is underperforming. You're framing it in a way where child's doing well. They're starting at a 5. Let's really push this. I'm going to put the support in place. I'm going to put the structure in place. I've got you involved, and you obviously want the best for your child moving forward. And the language then becomes about moving forward and making progress rather than they're not as focused as what they should be in lesson, which is a difficult thing to say because actually they are focused. They're just not pushing themselves. So really focus on those apathetic children in class. And it can be one of the hard things, like I mentioned before, it can be one of the really hard things to do. If you've got children that sit there, sort of get on with it, not causing any trouble, you're too busy focusing on the children that aren't maybe trying their best or aren't getting the work done. But those tend to be the students, the ones that sit there and nod along and do all the basics. Those tend to be the students that have the greatest negative impact on your outcome. So you cannot afford to forget those students. Okay. So you've now focused on our lab students, focused on our SEND students. We've got lots of modelling built into our lessons. We're really focused on developing that language for learning, really focused on developing that key knowledge and key understanding. We're really focused on developing that key terminology through developing wider reading and wider understanding. We've targeted those children in class that sit there and nod and just get on with it, and we're really building those relationships with them and with the parents, saying, I know you can do this. The next step is this. The next step is this. Don't leave those students to chance. Don't think they're just going to pull it out of the bag later on, because the vast majority of the time they won't, or even if they try to, they're not going to get to the grade they need to be getting without you constantly pushing them and gearing them along. Okay, so that will really support progress overall of all the students in your class. You cannot afford to let any child in that class fall through the net or just go, oh, they'll be okay, they'll be able to pull it out by themselves. You should be on the back of every single last child, and that's why I mentioned before this idea of workload, trying to keep your workload as sustainable as possible. You can focus on each and every student individually and have those support structures in place, like I mentioned before, these explain packs, these describe packs, these next level packs, these past answers and model information packs, all of those that can just be given out to support that student without requiring you to be there physically. But you're essentially chasing that student up and getting the parents involved and the guardians involved as much as possible to really support a student moving forward. Okay, so we're gonna have a quick listen now to the news, okay, and then we'll be moving on to have a think about assessment in terms of supporting outcomes. Ooh, wrong one. Sorry, guys.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News with Megan Goods.
This is your latest Teachers Talk Radio News. The latest modelled data from the Office for National Statistics has led to calls from school leaders to prioritise vaccinations for anyone over the age of 12. The data highlighted that students in years 7 to 11 in secondary schools had the highest infection rate of any age group, with one case in every 210 on the 2nd of June. At the start of May, the same age group's rate was over 4 times lower. One professor of infectious diseases at the University of Edinburgh, Mark Woolhouse, doesn't think the increased infection rate is a cause for concern just yet, saying, if the Delta variant is much more transmissible in children, it might raise the R number in schools above 1, and then you would consistently start to see larger outbreaks more frequently in schools. So far, I don't think the PHE data are convincing on that. Yes, there are outbreaks in schools, but it's a tiny fraction of them. The Children's Commissioner has said that the ease of access for children to online pornography is a key factor in the normalising of sexual harassment in schools. Dame Rachel D'Souza stated, one area I'm clear on is that online hardcore pornography warps boys' expectations of normal relationships and normalises behaviours that girls are then expected to accept, and it's just too easy for children to access. She has called for internet companies to introduce more restrictions on what children can access online, and also plans to work with tech companies, law enforcement, children's charities and schools on how to make children safer online. The Duchess of Cambridge and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden met for the first time last week as they visited Connor Downs Academy in Cornwall. They have since written a joint article stating the importance of early education for children. The letter, published by CNN, said, if we care about how children perform at school, how they succeed in their careers when they are older, and about their lifelong mental and physical health, then we have to care about how we are nurturing their brains, their experiences and relationships in the early years before school. That was your latest Teachers Talk Radio News.
Okay, welcome back. Sorry if you heard any banging there. My neighbour's just decided that he wants to try and knock a wall down by the sounds of it. So far we're back on focusing on improving outcomes for students, and feel free obviously to type into the chat or even call in and share your views in terms of improving outcomes at any stage. Could be a primary stage or secondary or even later on into further education. And feel free to share your views on what you think, or maybe hints and tips that have worked for you, or things that you may struggle with actually, and think, how do we try and overcome these particular areas? How do we tackle those students that are those nondescript students, the ones that just nod along and do everything that you ask to do without pushing further, that have the greatest impact on progress figures a lot of the time, in a negative way. So we've spoken an awful lot now in terms of progress about putting that curriculum in place, putting that support for staff to upskill your staff and upskilling the students to understand the specification and really allowing that self-regulation to support those students moving forward and support your staff in supporting your students essentially. Really looking at putting those interventions in place early on to make sure those students are not falling behind and developing that really strong relationship with the students and with parents and guardians at home to really focus the conversation around progress and academic attainment, and then focusing specifically on our LAP and our SEND students, those students that can make the greatest progress from their starting point and will have the greatest impact on your outcomes. It used to be, I'd say, about 5, 6, 7 years ago, the conversation around having bottom set year 11 on Friday afternoon, and the worst thing that could possibly happen is having a number of students with low ability in a classroom late in the afternoon and lost focus. And this idea of wanting to spend your time focused on the higher ability students. I think the really good change that has come into a movement on measuring progress rather than looking at the number of students getting A star to C and focusing on attainment is that no student now can fall through the gaps. Those students aren't just being left behind. In fact, those students arguably are more valuable in terms of making greater progress and having that focus reframed on those students to really support them. Okay. So in terms of assessment then, how can we use assessment to actually make greater progress to try and move students forward? And for me, I've been in a number of schools that have had a range of different assessments used. Some schools have just used, for example, an end of year exam. Some students leave it completely down to the teacher to follow their own assessment with in-class assessments. Nothing's being fed in centrally. You just put into Sims, for example, or other providers are available for data analysis. And you put in that data into there and it gets fed into the school and they use that data to try and inform the progress of your students. I've taught in schools where the students will sit down every half and be doing an exam that needs to be marked and fed in to a much wider system and analysed to within an inch of its life. And I would say that assessment itself can be very, very useful. Okay, it's almost invaluable when it comes to supporting strong outcomes for students. But at the same time, it can be something that actually massively demotivates not only the classroom teacher, but also demotivates the students as well. If you are assessing too much, all that assessment material and the information from it is not being used effectively to inform future learning, it loses its point, it loses its power. And for me, it's about really understanding what is assessment for. And I think the term that gets thrown around an awful lot is this idea that you don't fatten a pig by weighing it. And obviously, we've got to build that information, we've got to build that knowledge, we've got to build that understanding of students, but at the same time, we need to understand their progress over time. So there's a fine balance between assessment, there's a fine balance between obviously filling the bucket, as we call it, filling the information, those skills, and supporting those students to develop those information over time. And it's really important, I would say, that you understand why you are assessing. So, what is your assessment material? How has it been set up? Really focus on the structure of it and make sure it is fit for purpose. There's nothing worse than students doing an assessment that is not useful. And by that, I mean, has it covered your assessment objectives? Has it covered a range of skills? Can you measure from that assessment and identify the areas of weakness? The best assessments don't assess what students know, they identify what students don't know. They identify what skills are lacking. It's really, really important that when you're thinking about putting together your assessments, really focus on how will these questions help me understand what the students don't know, not what they know, what they don't know. Because ultimately, if we're looking for strong outcomes, we need to know what students don't know so we can plug those gaps and really support that strong progress over time. Okay, so look back at your assessment material. Is it fit for purpose? Is it giving us the information we know or we need to know? I would also say don't overkill the students on assessments. By that, I mean, don't have very, very long assessments with lots of different questions and they're going to take a very long time. Students are going to run out of time at the end and try and cram way too much in. That is not going to help you understand where students are at. So I'd say really focus on a number of questions from each topic area within your curriculum that covers skills, knowledge, and understanding, but keep it quite short and focused. That way, the students are going to be able to focus on giving their best responses. And if you're then seeing the best of your students, you can then really focus on where are the weaknesses. Whereas if students are rushing to try and get through every last question before the end of the paper and you're not seeing their full responses or their full effort that they would have time to respond in, that isn't going to inform you of the areas that need to be focused on as next steps. It's just going to inform students are not very good at time management and they're not being able to focus properly on the questions, which doesn't really help students' outcomes. So it's something that's very, very important. Make sure their assessments are fit for purpose. They cover the correct range, but not too much. And in terms of time, students have the right time and right support to be able to access those assessments as well. Okay, that will really allow you to then use that information effectively, not only to celebrate the students' successes, but really, really narrow down on where do we need to go, where are our next steps. Even if those students have got 8s, for example, or even 9s, focus on where the weaknesses are with those students as well. What do you need to focus on? And this needs to be a real focus on academic excellence for all, whether that student's target grade the 2 and is getting a 2, whether they're target grade the 9 and they're getting a 9. Every single student should be getting really useful feedback to be able to make stronger next steps. And that can be done in a number of ways, but what I would also say is make time for it. Plan it into your curriculum. If you're going to do feedback, maybe put a lesson or 2 lessons, more preferably, after each assessment point to really go through in detail and bring in the support methods we were talking about before this: modeling, support and language acquisition, plug in those gaps, build that into your curriculum. Because if you don't build it into your curriculum, it's only going to be an add-on later on. And once the time students are doing an intervention after school or break time or lunchtime, it's not only taking you away from focusing on the rest of the students and focusing on pushing forward outcomes, but most of the time it does not have the greatest impact on those students as well. And you want something that's impactful. And the best way to do that is build that cycle of assessment, feedback, and improvement into your actual curriculum itself. Don't just tag it on as an add-on. So very important, but also very, very powerful in terms of improving students' outcomes over time. Last thing I really want to speak about is becoming the strongest advocate for your subject. And you will find that when it comes to outcomes, passion has a massive, massive impact with this. The students have a passion for a subject, and most of the time, that passion for the subject actually comes from the teacher or the member of staff, whether it's the head department, whether it's the teacher. Most often, it's the teacher in the classroom. But you'll find that in terms of strongest outcomes, they tend to be the most passionate teachers. They'll be the ones in the staff briefings making quips about geography and being better than history, for example, or science being better than maths. Talking about that healthy competition within school, but also really focusing on my subject is the best because, and really developing that with the students. And at the beginning, it sounds almost like a gimmick in terms of selling your subject, or most of the questions that come around this in interviews, they talk about raising the profile of your subject within school. And we talk about things like putting trips on and putting these different ideas and improving the level of quality first teaching to support students' knowledge and understanding. But do not underestimate the power of building into your subject this real passion and sharing that with your students. The second students realise that teachers are so passionate about their subject and they want you to do really well in the subject, and they think you're the best subject in the world that's ever been created. For example, we've got previous classrooms had things like cardboard cutout of David Attenborough and things like that, and flags all around the classroom. And I'm really pushing geography is the best. And I'll when they go into the subject, I'll go, oh no, you might be spending 5 lessons in geography, and the kids will start joining in and getting with that. A bit of banter, a little bit of vibe to really try and support that subject within school as well, but not just doing that in a way that's laughy and jokey, also building in this fact of the academic side. Oh, you don't want to do that. Geography gets the best subjects in the school. We get the highest number of grade 9s in the school. We get the highest number of 9.5s. Our students make the greatest progress. Really relating your pride for your subject to progress and to moving forward. So there's a real focus on academic excellence and enjoyment of your subject, bringing those two sides together. Once that starts to build within your students, you will massively see the outcomes start to improve. Do you see your passion for the subject? They then know this idea of like, what do I need to do with your subject? What do I need that subject for? Once again, that apathy and that question of the subject, show them how passionate you are about them. Build into your curriculum things like Guthrie benchmarks are really important, and building in the careers, and this is where this subject can take you. This is how much you get paid. This is where it takes you around the world. These are different things you'd be doing. And every PowerPoint that we have in terms of our department, on the starting slide where you've got your title and your learning objective, etc., we always have the curriculum, not curriculum, careers links, should I say, for that particular topic of what we would be looking at that day to really try and support those aspirations for students. I use the term support because I don't think you can build aspirations in students. I think most of the time those aspirations are there to begin with. They just get knocked down over time. And for us, it's about supporting those aspirations and helping students to realise they can go to university, they can get the job they want, they can get a really high paid job, they can travel the world. Opening doors for our students through your subject is one of the strongest ways that you can get engagement from those students and wanting them to do well. Not only do they want to do well for themselves, but also you're so passionate about your subject and you're ranting and raving about how it's the best subject in the world. Students want to do it for you. They want to do it for the parents because you're on the phone to the parents all the time, telling them how amazing they are at the subject and next steps we need to keep moving forward is. Keep that focus on academic progress, keep that focus on the love of the subject and developing that real culture around your subject, and will have a massive impact in terms of students and moving forward. So those are the main ideas that I would really focus on in terms of providing students with the best outcomes. Okay, so what we're going to do is just recap essentially the main points that we've spoken about. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. If you want to share your ideas, feel free to phone in or type them into the chat. We can discuss some different ideas that people have got. But for me, my top list or top focuses, foci, should I say, in terms of supporting really strong outcomes, students are: one, make sure your curriculum is well sequenced with skills and knowledge to support that development of knowledge and understanding. Keep building in that retrieval practice so students keep going over information, and also try and build it as almost a spiral curriculum. It keeps building on the information that is already there. Something I didn't mention before, actually, that's I'd say for department needs is very useful, or I've found it very useful, particularly in supporting those students with SEND, is that every school produces a local offer, and this is basically your school saying this is the students that we provide for, this is the range of needs that we provide for as a school. And as department leads, we tend to be quite reactive when students come in with different needs. And we seem to be a little bit surprised and actually trying to put that support in place in terms of quality first teaching, and then bits and pieces aren't working. So we then need to put extra support in terms of differentiation to support those students. And once again, that's losing some of that learning time because we're being quite reactionary. What I would always recommend for people to do is have a really good look and a read. They're not the most interesting things in the world. I can't promise that you're going to be able to stay awake during it. But have a really good look at your local offer for your school. This is saying essentially these are the students that we cater for. If you know those students are being catered for within your school, you mightn't have any students with that particular need there at that moment in time, but we can be really proactive and try and build strategies into our quality first teaching and our wider curriculum that are going to best support the widest range of students. That way, we're not trying to backpedal once students with need come in. We're not losing that valuable learning time, but most importantly, we're not losing that engagement and focus from the students, that they don't understand it or the lesson's not been pitched completely right. And, oh, I don't like that subject anymore, or I don't do very good at that subject. I'm not very good at English. I'm not very good at maths. Really allowing students to be supported and scaffolded through your quality first teaching to actually make that progress straight away. That doesn't mean that your curriculum's going to be ready for absolutely everyone. We all need to make tweaks, and particularly with SEND, that's what's called special educational needs, that some students will need additional support. And that's where the role of differentiation comes in. But in the meanwhile, those students have been best supported through quality first teaching. Once again, really focusing on that upskilling of staff. Do not underestimate how important that is and keep going back to it. Right, this might be one member of staff areas of weakness. Great, we're going to put some training in place. So we're going to do some peer-to-peer coaching, try and really improve that area. And we had a big conversation about leadership and moving towards headship in not last week, week before's show. But the big focus there was that our two guests were talking about, they are now executive heads, but all the way through, they were focused on relying on other people and upskilling and supporting each other to move along. That took them through the progression path all the way up to executive head. Do not think just because you've plugged a certain gap that now we're the perfect teacher and we are completely fully skilled for everything we need. There's always more CPD, there's always more development, exactly the same way we'd want students to continue to develop. Keep focus on what's your next step. Keep focus on your personal development as well, not only for you, but also the impact that will have on your students. Number three, really big impacts, or really big focus, should I say, on understanding your spec. I cannot emphasize enough how building in the structure of answers into your lessons, building in how we access marks, or how we access levels, or how we access a certain assessment objective should be in every single lesson. Keep going back to it. Students should be able to essentially recite to you in the end exactly how they get those marks. Really train the students as the examiners. They should know inside out what they need to do to get those marks. You are then supporting your students make the greatest progress. They're not relying on you. They know how to do it themselves. Don't hide that side of mark allocation, etc., from the students. They will absolutely surprise you in terms of knowing and understanding development once you support them to do so. And really bringing that self-regulation. I can't say how powerful that is in terms of supporting that. Once again, set out your battle plan. Some students are not going to meet your expectations. Some students are going to fall behind. Okay, some students go up and down. Learning is not linear, it goes up and down over time. So really put that support in place ahead of time. Have yourself intervention packs ready for the areas that students most fall behind on. Like I mentioned before, is it explaining or is it describing? Is it a particular skill? Really focus that ahead of time so you can be proactive, and then Once the signs they're falling behind or may need a little bit of extra support, you can provide that really quickly without needing one-to-one support from yourself, or without relying too much on the students actually falling behind to a level where they need additional or significant additional support. You're really putting that support in place in a proactive way to celebrate greater progress. And I can't emphasize how much that works. Nothing worse for a student than being put in intervention after school for an hour when all the friends have gone home and being told you're being put in there because you've fallen behind. That most of the time doesn't have a spurring on moving forward impact on students' progress. They just can't really be bothered being there. Waste your time a little bit, waste their time a little bit, and it certainly, the vast majority of the time, doesn't have the greatest impact on outcomes. The greatest impact on outcomes is supporting students while they are in your classroom, supporting students with extra support when they are needed, but be really proactive with that, and really setting up that battle plan. Okay, if anyone wants to go through more detail with that or what exactly I do in terms of supporting students with the battle plan, feel free to contact me on Twitter. You can either message me or private message me, but I can talk about my battle plan until the cows come home. I even have what I call a war wall. It's basically got every student that I've got in year 11, year 10 and year 9, year 8 and year 7. It's got all their pictures on the wall, basically where they're at that point in time, what support they need. And this is something that can go out the window as you're in a bigger department, or if your department leads, your department becomes bigger, or you're managing a number of member of staff. If you've got a large number of students doing your subject, we tend to rely an awful lot on the classroom teachers, or you rely on the fact that other people in other classrooms are doing what they should be. I would say very, very much the book stops with you. Really focus on every student. Don't just focus on your classrooms. You need to be really proactive with that if you want to secure the strongest outcomes for your subject. Once again, focusing back, so I think this is point number 5 now, and we're doing quite well, we're flying through these, is really supporting those students who are low ability, really supporting those SEND students, and really tackling this apathy, these middle coasters, students that just sort of come in, do what they need to do, and then go home, and are just a lot of the time doing the bare minimum, just doing what you're asking them to do. They're not rocking the boat, they're not causing any trouble, but these 3 groups are the groups that can have the greatest negative impact on your outcomes if you allow them to. But most importantly, these 3 groups by far can have the greatest positive impact on your outcomes. If you want very, very strong progress outcomes in terms of student progress, these are the 3 groups of students that I would say you need to massively, massively focus on, support and encourage to get those really positive residuals. So focusing on your SEND students, your LAP students, and those students in the middle, the ones that just come in and get on with it, but are just doing the bare minimum, not pushing themselves the extra mile. And like I said, modeling. Show students how it's done. If you show them how it's done, they become much more confident. And later on, you can take that support away. But I cannot underestimate or overemphasize, should I say, the power of modeling in terms of improving outcomes. Really, really focus on that language acquisition. Make sure students are able to pick up the key terminology, make sure they're able to access that language for learning. And there's lots of different ways you can do that. We're going to be focusing next week, particularly on strategies to support quality affairs teaching and support students with SEND. So there'll be lots of strategies being shared next week if you want to tune in and share some of your ideas there. And really focusing on getting that buy-in for students, looking at our subject is the best subject. We're going to do this together. We're going to work with your parents, we're going to work with your guardians, we're going to work with school staff, we're going to work with teachers. We're going to work with you. Keep bringing it back to the students. I've given you next steps. This is what you need to do. Here is the support. And keep going back. You need to be almost relentless. You need to be almost dogged with that focus on keep moving forward, keep getting better. Yes, you might have a little knockback here and there, but this is the next step. This is how we're going to solve that issue. This is going to fill that gap and keep moving forward. And if you follow even some of those, you will start to see the impact it has on outcomes is so strong. Okay, so strong in terms of moving student forward, and so strong. You'll start to see the progress measures massively moving up, not only just in attainment, but progress as well. It has a massive impact over time. And those students that tend to be your pupil premium or your send, or where you say like focus on a particular group within school, if you focus all these strategies around a basis of really strong quality first teaching, all of your students will make progress. They'll make very strong progress. Most of the time it'll be very in line. So I know my progress data, for example, the LAP students are massively outperforming our HAP students. And it's not a case of the HAP students are underperforming. It's the case that HAP students have all reached a grade 9, and LAP students are just keeping on going. Like I said before, in terms of the greatest progress comes from the students that come in on lowest levels of attainment. So it's so important to really focus those students on this academic moving forward, academic excellence, and really develop that love of learning, really supported by you as a facilitator of learning. But I cannot stress enough, really focus it on the academic side. Keep moving forward. What are our next steps? Okay. So that is pretty much me for today. I hope I've ranted at you enough, and I hope you found it really useful and picked up some useful ideas. Like I said, if you want to share any ideas, you can always feel free to join in the conversation on Teacher Talk Radio, or tweet us at Teacher Talk Radio at 2021 and get involved. Share your ideas and your thoughts. Okay. So it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you as always, and I will hopefully see you back next week. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Live from Liverpool, this is Twilight Show with Scott Hughley. Live from Liverpool, this is the Twilight Show with Scott Hughley on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TT Radio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.